The Leviathan's Conduit. Chapter 1. The City of Weeping Brass. The rain in Athelgard was never just water. It was a soup of condensed steam, coal dust, and the metallic tang of industry that slicked the cobblestones and turned the towering skyline into a smudge of charcoal and indigo. It was a city that lived perpetually in the twilight, choked by its own breath. Elias Thorne sat in the window booth of the Gear and Griffin, nursing a tumbler of amber liquid that tasted faintly of engine grease. He preferred it that way. It reminded him of better days before he'd been blacklisted by the Guild of Etheric Engineers. He looked out the rain-streaked glass, his gaze drawn inevitably down the long canyon-like avenue outside. The thoroughfare was a river of wet light. The headlamps of brass grill omnibuses and the sputtering gas lanterns along the sidewalks reflected off the slick asphalt, creating a blurry mirror world. But everything, the traffic, the huddled pedestrians in their oilskin trench coats, the very architecture of the city seemed to bow in subservience to the thing at the end of the street. The spire. It rose like a monstrous deity of the industrial age. It was not merely a building, it was a vertical machine, a towering agglomeration of riveted iron plating, pressurized copper tubing, and thick vulcanized rubber conduits that writhed around its base like the tentacles of a kraken dragged from the deep. Where a normal skyscraper might have windows, the spire had eyes. Great circular portholes glowed with a fierce, pulsating yellow light, the color of a furnace heart. These weren't just lamps, they were the vents for the raw, volatile aether that powered every tram, heated every boiler, and lit every bulb in Athelgard. The city sucked at the spire's teat, desperate for the energy it provided, ignoring the low, subsonic thrum that vibrated in the teeth of everyone living within a 10-block radius. Elias rubbed his jaw, feeling the stubble snag against his leather gloves. He knew the spire better than most. He knew the tolerances of those massive brass pressure caps near the summit. He knew the sound the steam made when it hit critical velocity in the primary manifold. And he knew why the light was wrong tonight. It was subtle. To the average citizen hurrying home to escape the deluge, the spire looked as it always did, imposing and eternal. But Elias saw the tremor in the light. The yellow glow didn't just pulse, it shivered. It was the visual equivalent of a heart arrhythmia. "It's hungry tonight, isn't it?" Elias didn't turn from the window. He knew the voice, gruff, smelling of cheap tobacco and damp wool. It was Silas Vane, a foreman on the spire's night shift, and one of the few people who still dared to talk to Elias. "It's unstable, Silas," Elias murmured, watching a steam car skid slightly on the wet pavement below. "The frequency variation in the aether output is hitting 4%. The guild standard is 0.5. Silas slid into the booth opposite him. His face was grey, the grime of the shift etched deep into his worry lines. He kept his hands hidden beneath the table. 4%, Silas whispered hoarsely. "Is that why the sub-basement gauges are screaming? They're redlining, Elias, all of them. We're venting steam straight into the sewers just to keep the pressure casings from blowing. But the heat is rising from below." Elias finally turned his gaze from the window. "Below? You mean the geothermal intake?" Silas shook his head, his eyes wide and terrified in the dim gaslight of the pub. "Not geothermal, boy. Deeper, below the foundations, where the main conduits root." He leaned in closer, his voice barely audible above the din of the pub and the drumming rain. "The pipes are singing, not the steam whistle sound, a low sound, like something vast is breathing down there." Elias felt a cold spike of adrenaline cut through the fog of the whiskey. Did you report it to High Proctor Caelan? Caelan? Silas scoffed, a wet hacking sound. Caelan had the pressure gauges painted over last week because the red zone was bad for morale. He doesn't care about the science, he only cares that the lights stay on and the factories keep churning. Silas suddenly gripped Elias's forearm. His grip was iron hard, terrified. Under the table, he jammed something cold and cylindrical into Elias's palm. "Take it," Silas hissed. "It's a wax cylinder recording from the deep sensor array. The one they think is broken. I fixed it. I recorded 10 minutes of what's happening at the root of the spire before the heat got too intense. Silas, if Caelan's clockwork wardens catch you with stolen data, they won't catch me if you take it and run. You're the only one who can understand the readings, Elias. You built the filtration algorithm before they kicked you out. You have to listen to it. You have to..." The front door of the Gear and Griffin slammed open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and rain. The noise in the pub died instantly. Framed in the doorway stood 2 figures. They were tall, draped in heavy rubberized coats and brass-rimmed helmets that obscured their faces entirely. They moved with the stiff, heavy precision of Ottomans, their joints clicking audibly. Clockwork wardens, the High Proctor's personal enforcers. Their helmet lenses, glowing a faint, menacing red, swept the room before locking on the booth by the window. Silas shoved Elias hard. "Go! The back kitchen door! Now!" Elias didn't argue. He pocketed the wax cylinder and rolled out of the booth just as the first warden raised a pneumatic repeater rifle. He heard the thwump hiss of a compressed air canister firing, followed by the shattering of glass where his head had been a second before. He scrambled through the kitchen, dodging startled cooks and bubbling pots of stew, bursting out into the alleyway. The air was colder here, the rain heavier. He didn't look back. He ran, the monolithic shape of the spire looming over the alley mouth like a judge waiting to pass sentence, its yellow eyes burning holes in the rainy dark.
Chapter 2. The Song of the Abyss. Elias's workshop was in the district known as the Rust Belt, a graveyard of derelict factories and sinking tenements located in the perpetual shadow of the city's upper levels. It smelled of ozone and neglected copper. He barred the heavy iron door and wasted no time. He went straight to his workbench, clearing aside half-disassembled clockwork pigeons and coils of copper wire to reveal an antique phonograph he'd modified with etheric amplifiers. His hands were shaking as he loaded the wax cylinder Silas had given him. He cranked the mechanism, lowered the diamond-tipped needle, and put on his heavy acoustic headphones. At first, there was only the static hiss of the wax and the rhythmic clank hiss of industrial pistons, the standard heartbeat of the spire. But then, beneath it, the sound emerged. It wasn't mechanical. It was a resonance, a sound so deep it seemed to bypass his ears and vibrate directly in his sternum. It sounded wet, viscous, like a mountain of mud shifting in the dark. He adjusted the filters on his console, isolating the low frequencies. The sound clarified into a rhythm. Inhale, exhale, slow, massive, and utterly terrifying. Elias stared at the oscilloscope built into his console. The waveform wasn't chaotic energy. It was organized. It was biological. "Sweet mother of gears," he whispered. He grabbed a stack of blueprints from a locked drawer, plans he'd stolen on his last day at the spire. He spread them out, tracing the lines of the massive intake conduits, those thick, tentacle-like pipes that burrowed deep into the bedrock beneath the city. Officially, Ethelgard ran on aether gas geothermal, a limitless, clean energy source found deep within the Earth's crust. The spire was just a very fancy pump. Elias looked at the blueprints and at the readings on his oscilloscope. The energy signature wasn't thermal, it was something else, something older. The realization hit him with the force of a steam hammer. The spire wasn't a pump, it was a parasite. The city founders hadn't discovered a new energy source, they had discovered a dormant thing beneath the earth, a creature of immense, impossible scale. And for 50 years they had been siphoning its latent bioenergy to power their toasters and tram lines. "It's waking up," Elias said to the empty room. The 4% fluctuation, the heat in the sub-basements, it wasn't an equipment malfunction. The host was beginning to stir, irritated by the tick that had been drinking its blood for half a century. If the creature woke up fully, if it thrashed even a fraction of an inch in its geological slumber, it would shatter the foundations of Ethelgard like cheap porcelain. The spire would fall and the city would drown in fire and rain. A heavy thud against his workshop door made him jump. Thud. The sound of metal on metal, heavy boots. The clockwork wardens. They had tracked him. Silas must have broken, or they had simply followed the trail of paranoia straight to the city's most notorious dissident engineer. Thud. Crack. The iron bar holding the door began to bend. Elias grabbed his satchel, stuffing the blueprints and the wax cylinder inside. He strapped on his own invention, a gauntlet powered by a small, volatile aether cell, capable of discharging a concentrated shock. It was illegal, dangerous, and his only option. The door burst open in a shower of rust and splintered wood. 2 wardens filled the frame, rain dripping from their brass caracases. Without a word, they raised their pneumatic rifles. Elias didn't wait for them to fire. He slammed his gauntleted fist onto his workbench. The aether cell discharged into the metal surface, sending an arcing wave of blue lightning across the room. The wardens convulsed as the electricity overloaded their clockwork servos. They jerked violently, sparks showering from their joints before collapsing into heavy, twitching heaps. Elias vaulted over the fallen automatons and sprinted out into the rain. He couldn't hide anymore. He had the proof, but proof was useless if the city collapsed before morning. He had to go to the source. He had to go down.
Chapter 3. The Belly of the Beast. The closer he got to the spire, the heavier the air felt. The rain here was warmer, heated by the immense thermal radiation bleeding from the tower's skin. The roar of the machinery was deafening, a constant thundering crash that vibrated in the marrow of his bones. The streets immediately surrounding the spire were cleared, blocked off by brass barricades and patrolling wardens. The great conduits, those thick, ribbed tentacles of metal and rubber, emerged from the pavement here, thick as redwood trees, pulsing with internal light as they snaked upwards to join the main body of the tower. Elias didn't take the streets. He went underneath. He accessed the old sewer network through a rusted grate in an alleyway 3 blocks over. The sewers of Ethelgard were a nightmare of slick slime and scalding steam vents, but they were unguarded. He waded through knee-deep sludge, guided only by the flickering light of a phosphorus match. He followed the heat. He followed the sound. The deeper he went, the more the architecture changed. The Victorian brickwork of the sewers gave way to older, rough-hewn stone, and finally to the smooth, unsettling metal of the spire's foundations.
He reached the intake chamber, a cavernous space far below the city streets, hollowed out of the living bedrock. The heat was intense, searing his lungs with every breath. In the center of the chamber, the massive root conduits converged, plunging down into a circular pit that glowed with blinding, malevolent light. This was the throat of the spire, where it fed. Standing on the metal catwalk overlooking the pit was High Proctor Kalen. Kalen was a thin man in an immaculate silk suit that seemed impervious to the grime of the city. He wore spectacles with smoked lenses to shield his eyes from the etheric glare. He was watching a team of engineers, men like Silas, stripped to their waists, sweating profusely as they desperately turned massive valve wheels on the conduit junctions. "More pressure to the stabilizing vents," Kalen shouted over the roar, his voice amplified by a brass speaking trumpet. "Hold the flow steady, you damn you!" "It won't hold, Kalen." Elias stepped onto the catwalk, his voice raw. Kalen turned, surprised but not alarmed. He adjusted his spectacles. "Ah, the prodigal engineer. I assume my wardens had a malfunction. How disappointing." "You know what's down there," Elias shouted, pointing into the blinding pit. "You've always known. It's not geothermal steam, it's alive." Kalen smiled, a thin, cruel line. "Of course it's alive, Mr. Thorne. What do you think provides better energy density than coal or steam? Life, raw, primal, ancient life. We tapped into a god sleeping beneath our feet, and we harnessed it to build civilization." "It's waking up! The drain is too high! You're torturing it into consciousness! If it moves, Aethelgard falls!" "A calculated risk," Kalen snapped, losing his composure. "Progress requires fuel. The city demands light. What would you have us do? Turn off the spire? Go back to candles and horse-drawn carts? The people would riot in a day. They would tear us apart." Suddenly, the entire cavern lurched. A shockwave knocked the engineers off their feet. Dust and rock rained down from the ceiling. The light from the pit shifted from yellow to an angry, violent crimson. A sound blasted up from the depths, no longer just breathing, but a low, terrible groan that shattered the glass dials on the pressure gauges. "It's breaching!" one of the engineers screamed, scrambling backward on the catwalk. The massive metal conduits began to writhe. The rivets popped with sounds like gunshots. The metal itself seemed to groan in sympathy with the beast below. "Fool!" Elias yelled at Kalen, who was clutching the railing, looking down into the pit with a mixture of awe and terror. "The stabilizing vents won't work. You're trying to put a lid on a volcano." "Then what do we do, genius?" Kalen screamed back, his arrogance finally shattered by fear. "We have to induce a shock," Elias said, his mind racing, remembering the blueprints. "A reverse surge. We have to feed the ether back down into the intake, overload the connection. It might stun the creature back into dormancy." "That's impossible," Kalen cried. "The backflow would blow the primary capacitors. It would black out the entire city. The spire might never restart." "It's darkness or death, Kalen. Choose." Another quake hit, stronger than the first. A crack appeared in the bedrock wall of the cavern, and steam hissed out violently. Kalen looked at the crack, then at Elias. He pulled a brass key from around his neck and threw it. "The main override console is on the upper platform," Kalen yelled over the roar. "Do it before we're all buried." Elias caught the key and ran. He scrambled up a metal ladder to a higher control platform overlooking the whole chaotic scene. He jammed the key into the master console and twisted it. A bank of heavy brass levers unlocked. These controlled the primary flow direction. He grabbed the central lever, the metal hot enough to blister his gloves. He needed to reverse the flow of the most powerful energy source mankind had ever known. Below, the light from the pit was blindingly red. He could feel the presence of the thing down there, vast, alien, and furious.
Chapter 4. The Quiet After. The sound that followed was not of this world. It was the scream of machines dying and a god being struck by lightning. The backflow hit the creature. The massive conduits buckled, turning white hot. A blast of displaced air and energy erupted from the pit, knocking Elias flat against the metal grating of the platform. The crimson light flared to an impossible brilliance, then collapsed inward. Darkness fell like a hammer. The roar of the machinery died instantly, replaced by the horrible, ringing silence of a dead engine. The only sound was the hiss of cooling metal and the whimpering of the surviving engineers below. Elias lay in the dark, gasping for air, his body bruised and burned. Slowly, one by one, emergency gas lamps hissed to life along the cavern walls, casting dim, flickering shadows. Elias dragged himself to the railing and looked down. The pit was dark. The conduits were still, cooling from white to sullen red. The vibration in the floor was gone. The beast slept again. He climbed down the ladder. Kalen was gone, fled into the shadows the moment the lights went out. Silas was there, helping the other engineers up. He looked at Elias, his face streaked with soot and blood, and nodded once, slowly, a silent thank you. Elias made the long trek back up to the surface. When he pushed open a maintenance hatch and emerged onto street level, the city was unrecognizable. Athelgard was dark. The endless churning roar of industry was gone. The electric street lamps were dead. The windows of the skyscrapers were black obsidian mirrors. The trams sat motionless on their tracks. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking up, and for the first time in living memory, moonlight, real pale moonlight, filtered down to the wet streets. People were emerging from buildings, holding candles and oil lamps, their faces filled with confusion and fear, looking up at the sky, then at the spire. The great tower stood silent and dark against the skyline, a dead monument to a stalled age. Its yellow eyes were closed. Elias stood on a high vantage point, overlooking the sprawling, darkened metropolis. The air tasted cleaner already, the coal smoke dissipating in the cool night breeze. The silence was profound. It was terrifying, but it was also peaceful. The city was alive, but the machine had stopped. They would need new ways to live now, harder ways, but they would be human ways, not borrowed from a sleeping nightmare beneath the earth. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the wax cylinder. He looked at it for a moment in the moonlight, then dropped it onto the pavement and crushed it beneath his boot. The song of the abyss was over. He turned up the collar of his coat against the chill wind and began the long walk home through the quiet, moonlit streets of a city that was, for the first time in a century, truly asleep.
Disclosure. This experimental text and story was created by artificial intelligence, Gemini. The narrative voice of this audiobook was also artificially generated. Even this voice is artificially generated. This process developed through stages. 1 year earlier, I worked on graphic design projects with Microsoft Designer. experimenting and creating various graphic concepts, mainly for my YouTube channel icons in form of dioramas, but also cover albums for my music productions. As the progress of AI took a big step into reality in recent months, especially with image, music, video generations or research texts, I've placed one of those single graphics into a Gemini Chat. I've asked if Gemini can write a short book story based on this single image. My request was a thriller, steampunk, fantasy drama text written on 20 pages. Minute after the request, the story was delivered by Gemini. If that's a future of our books and stories we will read in years to come, who knows? Maybe. Or I can even say most probably yes, and we have to acknowledge this fact. This process develops on weekly basis in all AI areas. I would not be an extra futuristics if I would say that in next few years we will witness a fully AI-developed feature movies as well festivals and awards related to such productions. But don't panic. Treat this as an organic progress and evolution. I hope you enjoyed this story, and if so, then please subscribe to my channel. Tara!